According to some people that listened to slash watched our episode last week, we had a bro heavy conversation, quote unquote, about beauty and attraction. I must confess, while positive and respectful, our talk left a critical perspective out of the conversation, a female voice. Today, we continue the conversation with Elizabeth and get her take on the laws of attraction as understood by womanhood. Tune in. Are there differences in the kinds of beauty? Like, are there different kinds of beauty from your perspective?
Yes. There's as many different kinds of beauty as there are drops of water in the sea. And you see all people looking all different kinds of ways, partnered up. We see different expressions of beauty. So there's not one type.
So, you don't think that the idea of a beautiful person is ubiquitous, like this modern perspective of symmetry being some kind of indication of beauty?
No, that's not what I think. I think there are common threads, common elements that across the board, across place and time, people find beautiful, but there are always outliers. So there are always people who will find something different beautiful.
So, Jonathan Majors, as an example, is someone that for the longest time was projected as an attractive person. During his rise, and I've noticed that many women, are vocal about saying that he's not attractive, or there's just been this backlash in terms of like him being considered attractive. Now, I don't know one way or the other, but from the perspective of a female, would you say that he's a conventionally attractive person, or that there's something, some je ne sais quoi about him that maybe the, you know that makes him attractive and made someone say, hey, this is someone that we want to be a leading man?
Yes, the je ne sais quoi. He's not the most stereotypically, or maybe not stereotypically, but obviously or typically. He's not the most typically good looking in the most boilerplate ways that makes someone like really obviously, oh, just wow, gorgeous. That's not the kind of attractiveness he possesses. But I would say he's a handsome man. And then the backlash, like the slander against his looks, it's like when people took sides, or I guess you said women, a lot of them took sides where he was the bad guy in this scenario that came out in his personal life. They took they took jabs at his looks, at his attractiveness. And first of all, that's a very immature, it's like an elementary school type of, you're ugly. Like, first of all, not appropriate, not nice, and not to the point. But secondly, yes, it's a lot of people have a unique kind of attractiveness, something different about them, something, or it's like if we were just animals, then maybe we'd only find certain things attractive, but because we all have the heart of an artist to some extent or another, we can look at something with fresh eyes. We can look at something in different ways, or we're presented with something different and it's intriguing. So for these reasons, there's not just one type of attractiveness.
Okay, so let me ask this question. Do you think that there is a male attractiveness that's distinct from a female attractiveness? And do you even think that that is something that's tracked, at least from a female to male perspective? I don't know what's going on in the um, in the LGBTQ community. But as a woman looking at a man, um, is there a scale that's used to measure men that's about how they look? Because from the outside looking in, I see a lot of times women with all kinds of men based on all kinds of things that are driving them to be attractive to them. Men that make them feel safe, men that are strong, men that are rich, men that are powerful. It's not as simple as how it seems to be from the man to woman side, where it's a woman that you're sexually attracted to, let's just say, in some that you find attractive in some way.
Yeah, no, it's different, I would say. There's not this emphasis on looks. Like maybe a woman would say, "Oh, he's so handsome" or something. They'll say something, but it's not. You know how they have the word locker room talk or something. I wouldn't say there's really that's a thing with women where it's like, "Oh, did you see her so and so? Did you see his buns or something?" It's not it's not really like that. Like if I'm talking to a girlfriend about someone she likes, she's going to talk about all these things about him. So yeah, it's more holistic as a person, the traits and the qualities. I mean, that being said, there's still like an attractiveness element in attraction, I guess. So, some women find, like the typical ones, a handsome face, could be height or could be, a nice build. But yeah, it's not so like objectified like body parts and all that. There's not, even from way back when I was in high school and my friends started having like their first boyfriends and stuff, different looks. It wasn't all about looks. It was, yeah, so it seems to be different. The whole beauty thing. And likewise, men don't seem to really compete on the beauty front. They're quaffing and using beauty products, this and that, to try to get women with their looks. That's not how they're gonna get women. In fact, it's funny, I've had the inverse conversation with friends where um if a guy was on social media taking selfies and like always in the gym and always trying to look pretty, it was like, ugh, what's wrong with him? Like, gross. No. So it's more like a sign to run the other way. He's not supposed to be gazing into the mirror and worried about his looks. He's supposed to be about bigger things. So it's different.
So, how do you feel about the way that in academic circles, I sort of overhear you always listening to these professors or these research scientists quantifying humanity and the human experience in terms of like beauty, reducing people to numbers and statistics and things of that nature, right? Almost like the person I imagine in my head, the nerd in the nightclub going,
Saying,
that's,
"Oh, that woman's tilting her chin
yeah.
upward and swept her hair to the side. That's a biological indicator of sexual
Exactly. Yeah.
attraction."
Right. These people are the guys who wished that everyone wore a name tag in the nightclub and they could just filter the women that had the name tag that said looking for a good time,
Yeah.
looking for action, and, not deal with the biological dance that you have to go
Right.
through, right, in order to meet someone. Why?
Like they're
Why?
kind of removed from the process
Yeah.
outside of nature, so they're standing outside trying to examine it. I mean,
Yeah.
that's how I felt for a long time with a lot of academia.
Yeah.
Is it's just inside us. It's a lot of what studies it is what's in us, and we inherently understand, and we don't have to um, pick apart and break down.
Exactly.
But
Why
yeah,
is this a field of
I
study? Why
mean,
do we need to study?
yeah, some people, they are nerds and they're trying to get a read. They're trying to get a read on things, and it's, so it can give some insight. But a lot of us are just like, yeah, we don't need this. We understand. Um,
But my
yeah,
question is, to what end? Again, nature is going to take its course. We wouldn't be here if nature didn't take its course. There's a big aspect of humanity that's just natural and just happens. It doesn't require us to have knowledge of whether or not men are from Mars or women are from Venus or what have you, if you get what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, it might not be to any end. It might just be curiosity. I don't know if they I don't know if inside all this research people give reasons as to why
I know
the
the reasons.
purpose,
I know the
you know.
reasons.
But
It's nefarious by nature. It's about
mm,
ways to financially capitalize on whatever it is. Now you have the nerd trainers out there on social media that's, I'm going to teach you how to date a woman and do this and do that. There's only going to be more of that. There's also the other side of it, the pheromone side, right, which goes towards uh, perfumes and colognes and things that you can wear, ways you can dress, or what have you,
yeah,
lifestyle brands that all try to use science as a mechanism to say
right.
that, hey, this is.
And that reminds me, this goes off track a little bit, just to touch on this, but also loop back to the question about different kinds of beauty. I remember an episode of Oprah where they had, a scientist on there, and he explained this experiment. We had a room full of single men and single women, and they tracked who hooked up with whom, as far as like everyone chose someone sort of to couple up with that they were attracted to, not outside of the experiment, just this is the person I like, I find attractive. And he tracked like that the pheromones they were excreting indicated the largest genetic differences, because it's healthy to mate with people who are what they call it, genetic diversity. So there's also that aspect of what you were just saying, but also back to different types of beauty. You might not find someone attractive who's too similar to you, because there's no, not just that, but as the French say, vive la différence. The difference is the polarity is part of attraction.
I don't think
So,
I could be attracted to a cave person.
well,
I'm just saying.
that's another issue. Okay, well, say it was, someone who was, say, a third cousin or something, and you didn't know they were a third cousin, but there's something sort of similar. You're with them, and they seem too similar. That might not be someone you'd want to be with,
Yeah, presumably. I don't know. I
presumably.
don't necessarily feel like that it doesn't seem to me like that's what drives that's what drives things. I mean, it sounds like a novel idea, but there's obviously a lot of people that I've seen that literally look like they could be brother and sister, and they seem to go after people that look a certain kind of way. I mean, I think if that's how human beings were, there wouldn't be any races. We would have already um, mixed, right? Which we all know scientifically we're supposed to be mixed. We have the most capabilities, right, when we're mixed, and we're most resilient to all
Disease
these,
and
to
stuff.
disease and everything. But for whatever reason, socially, mixing has been, has
Yeah, I've
not
seen
gone
it
that way.
too, but it's not for whatever reason, right? We know the reasons. We know humans are, possess this tribalism by nature, and wanting to, concepts of carrying on practices, culture, religion, traditions, even bloodlines. So the mind can certainly overpower biology and vice versa. So, that's the predicament we get into.
It's ironic because I remember once watching this documentary about the selfish gene, and
Mm-hmm.
it's the first time that I saw myself as genes as opposed to seeing myself as the individual, right? The underlying systems that are driving everything. We're all genes. And from that perspective, I suppose you can sort of see how the more diverse you are, the more you're sort of saying, hey, half of the genes that I have right now are just gonna not continue, right? Because you're mixing it up quite a bit. So from the perspective of the gene, it would drive you to a certain extent a little bit more towards people that are
Homogeny.
similar. Yes, right.
Interesting. I haven't heard of
Because
that.
it's easier to replicate, right? You're staying alive for longer. It's less risk, as
Mm.
opposed to when you know, go that other route. But then in the more macro scale, obviously, if everyone was mixing, right, then
Everything would,
everything
yeah.
would would stay, would
Mm. Yeah.
stay together.
And I guess that's a good metaphor for ourselves, for not just the genes, but um, our psyches as well. Wanting to carry on, wanting to keep things the same, aversion to change, but also wanting growth and expansion at the same time. It's kind of who we are as humans. So,
Absolutely.
mm.
I definitely rarely want to leave the couch, but but I definitely do want to eat.
It's like I think of like the soul and the spirit as kind of wanting to flip sides of a coin. The soul is what brings you into the home, what makes you want to be around family, to curl up, to be with your loved ones, to all those beautiful things. And then the spirit is the thing that urges you outward and onward and wants you to explore and create and expand and go new places, meet new people, and both are these kind of driving forces of the human spirit. But sometimes it's hard. They pull in different directions.
That's a very interesting way of looking at things. I absolutely agree with it. And yes, I think that it lines itself up with people saying things like, that person has too much spirit. you know, like if you have too much spirit but not enough soul, then you can kind of be, you know, very aloof in a weird sort of
Mm.
way, right? Not, almost like that show that we watched, Jack Reacher, who's just traveling the world, no connection to anyone, but always ready for a fight and always willing to like kill people as opposed to bring
Yeah.
them to justice, right?
Can't, yeah, he has trouble planting roots. And I think the season finale, that extended scene at the end where she's saying we're more than friends, and he keeps looking back, but not wistfully. He has that still stone expression. It's trying to say that like deep down in there's a heart, and it's really hard for him to access it.
Doesn't have
Right.
enough soul to make him want to stay
Take roots.
take roots and stay
Hmm.
connected. It's not that we don't all want to just go off and be free and do all those things. It's that you also want that sense of connectedness and that drive to just connect and to stay and to be still. What are your views on two things? The two things we've talked about so far. The first being just the general um, notion of beauty. Do you think that it's driven by nature? Do you think it's driven by nurture? And then, more importantly, from your perspective, from the female perspective, do you think that there's a distinction between how it's driven for men versus how it's driven for women?
Nurture is part of our nature, right? So it's it's not even up for debate. It's proven. I think like in different groups of study, like sociologists, people who study things from a cultural vantage point, and then biologists who study from a scientific
So hold on.
point.
So do you mean nerds?
Well, I mean, people who get in depth study and then they have statistics, they have research, all this stuff. So they're studying it from just one point. But from us on the outside, when we read what's happening, we know that, across societies, across time and place, like, for example, with women, the waist to hip ratio, that's across all cultures, um, modern um, and traditional, what have you. So there's obviously biological imperatives because we need to reproduce to keep the species alive. So there is attraction of of things that signal reproductive health and fertility.
So let me cut you off because I'm not talking about general womanhood or general manhood because we understand that. I'm talking about the nuance that sits inside of nature, right? In the sense that yes, you can you can there might be some hip to waist ratio out there, but if I'm a person who doesn't like white women, then I'm not going to be attracted to white women. And I guess the question is there a societal impact if I see on TV all the time beautiful women that are always white, that I idolize, right? Is that going to make me more inherently attracted to white women or Chinese or whatever, right? Like,
Yeah, so my answer would be yes, but indirectly. So what happens is we see all these images, and men are supposedly more visual, right? So we see all these images based on what's popular. But again, according to research, when a man has his first, um, doesn't have to be being intimate with a woman, but first experience of that sort. So it could be seeing someone nude, or, or um, a scenario that's charged in that way. Maybe it's in a magazine. But supposedly, what happens is the first impression that is made, like you talked about with superhero comics, you're, a older boy, or you're starting to maybe see women that way, that imprints in the psyche, and from then on, that is what you are attracted to. So if you're in a society where, like, say, a boy's first glimpse of a naked woman is his dad's Playboy magazine, he's more likely to be attracted to that in the future moving forward. So there's that whole dynamic. And
but why didn't that apply to me as a young Nigerian boy in Nigeria,
mhm.
where the ideal of beauty and the standard of beauty is so drastically different than how it is in America? In a place like Nigeria, the the entire my entire upbringing,
Mhm.
more thick women,
Mhm.
right? More
Mhm.
meat on the bones, larger in every sense of the word, was totally, that's how I was socialized. That's what
Mhm.
I saw people going after. That's what I saw men speak and say that that's attractive. That's how that society is. Thin women, athletic women, the women in the magazines and the comic books that I read growing up were not looked at as, like a woman who actually looked like that in the real world would not in Nigeria be considered attractive at all. Those women were trying to eat to get bigger.
Well, I would sort of say the same thing. I mean, attraction is really, really complex. And I think it has to do a lot with the psyche too. And it can't be shrunken down to some little formula. I'll just say that. Um, it could, you could go all Freudian with it too, with your relationship with your mother, with all kinds of things, or a primary caretaker. But what I will say, or just your unique Eunice. But what I will say is, like, it sounds like from what you were saying that despite what you saw growing up, you were into comic books, you read those, and that did catch your eye. So it could have been in spite of what was culturally popular, or um, it could have been maybe in biological terms, it's attractive for women to be, I don't know, you could say curvy, let's say. And so maybe in some societies women start to overshoot it, or there are societies where like, say, biologically being overweight is not a signal of fertility, and there's plentiful food, so a lot of women are heavier, so then they're trying to get back down, and then they could overshoot the skinniness. So then skinniness becomes very popular, where it's easy to be heavy, or vice versa.
So let me ask this question to you that I asked to Ahmed. Do you think that for women, maybe it's a lot more on the nature side, meaning that the idea of what's attractive is very static? Strength and power and things like that, it's always going to be the same for the most part. But whereas for men, there's so much variety because it's very visual, because it's so much about the woman, how she physically looks in all these minute ways that don't necessarily matter so much, again, from a man's perspective to a woman, right? From a woman, do those things matter? Like, are you going around going, yeah, I want thin guys. Oh, I like tall guys. I like bulky guys. I like short, stout guys. Or is it just I like strong guys?
Yes, to answer, I do think it's different between men and women. One thing I've noticed with all my female friends and the women I know is that a good chunk of them do have like types and are what I would even sometimes call superficial, and they're into looks. But the thing I've noticed with everyone that I can think of, like in my head going through my friends, is everyone who's like that has then fallen for a guy who was quote unquote not her type, didn't think he was that great looking initially, and becomes obsessed with the guy, and they get in a relationship. So, yes, I think those are not as overpowering with women. And that when attraction happens, when you're in a room with someone, there's a lot of like energy interplay. So there can be a lot of things that attract you to a person that don't have to do with their looks, even when you're using the word attraction. For men, one way that I think nurture could come into play strongly is that a lot of men are in competition with other men, essentially. And so if you see some men who really have like an ideal type or a type that's out there a lot as popular, they can often be doing it for other men.
I think that the same thing that happens to men happens to women in the sense that as a man, I definitely think that there's an ideal of attractiveness that's out there. And then I definitely think that there's a way that your body or you are going to respond to a person who you genuinely find attractive, and they can be very different. But the problem is that from a male perspective, women are like pizza, right? Like, doesn't matter how bad pizza is, it's still good, right?
Yeah.
So it's not, you're not so, I mean, unless it's just a person that's repulsive to you in one, for one reason or another. Um, Basically, if they can fulfill your sexual desires in one form or another, then it's easy to then you may not necessarily get to the point of saying, hey, this is not my type, right? It's because sex is so far up there. And then the other part of it, which you alluded to and which Ahmed also said, is this whole idea that men are in competition with each other, and so that social standard of beauty that's more driven by the power brokers that I said earlier can drive certain people that don't care one way or the other. It's almost like it's homoerotic or something like that. They're more impressed with themselves and like impressing their friends and exhibiting power and what they can attain than they are with their own specific
Oh, that could
desires.
be, you know how sometimes in Hollywood you see like the star cheating with the nanny?
They cheat because they're those guys that have gone for the ideal.
Right.
They've gone for, or not the ideal. They've gone for the standard.
Right.
They've gone for some obvious standard because it's been more about everybody else and showing their ability to hunt, so to speak, right? It's because that's sort of like what it translates to in this day and age. It translates to your virility as a man, as opposed to something that's really about you.
Because you could attain something that's hard to
That's hard
attain.
to attain. It's really boils down
So
to
even
that.
in terms of her status, she's hard to attain.
Exactly.
So one thing though that I've noticed at the end of the day is that when people embrace what makes them different beauty wise, it tends to end positively. And often those are the people that shift the tide in popular beauty standards. So it just goes to show we're dynamic in what we perceive as beautiful. We're not just, mind controlled, and we're not just so easily manipulated. It's often someone comes on the scene with a different look. You talked about Marilyn Monroe, um, people kind of come in with a whole different paradigm, and their beauty's often really celebrated.
What is it that makes our desires tick? And does any of it make any sense at all? After listening to Ahmed and Elizabeth and researching what many scientists, anthropologists, and sociologists say, one thing is certain. We can poke and prod and put a magnifying glass or quantum computer to the fabric of the human spirit and go on that long, winding road to the humanist self-discovery. One day in the future, after all the numbers are tallied, a future scientist will look up at his colleagues and declare, the heart wants what it wants. Till next week, keep your thinking caps on.